Hi, I'm John Carmichael, Chief of Police of the Walpole Police Department. I'm also a member of the Massachusetts Chiefs of Police Association. Soon, Massachusetts will be challenged in deciding if our state should legalize marijuana or not. As I travel around the state talking about this topic, what I consistently find is that citizens seem to be confused about what we're actually facing if legalization of recreational marijuana would come to Massachusetts. What many citizens envision in their mind, I believe, is the plant material form of marijuana, commonly known as pot. And what people typically think of when they think of pot is the marijuana cigarette, which is the most common form in the past that has been used to consume marijuana. But in reality, what Massachusetts is really considering is the allowance of home cultivation, manufacturing, and even processing of marijuana. This includes THC-laced edibles and such as candies, baked goods, and beverages, as well as high concentrates of processed THC oils. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. But just for clarification, THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. That's the psychoactive substance, that component that's in the marijuana plant that causes the high within a user. Now, these products would become highly commercialized and create a new retail marijuana market, including marijuana stores and marijuana bars, that would be throughout Massachusetts. And edibles, the THC edibles would become 50% of this market. These infused edible products would vary significantly in potency, and I'm going to also demonstrate that. But they have an average range of THC from 18 to 30%, and typically come in 10 milligram sizes. Now, the problem posed with edibles is that the serving sizes are not always apparent, and a single marijuana cookie may equate to 4 to 6 servings. Now, you ask yourself, when is the last time that you had 1/4 of a cookie, or a gummy bear, or even a beverage, or a couple sips of a beverage? It doesn't usually happen. So, since marijuana candies are infused or sprayed with THC, these products cannot identify as having an accurate THC potency. And that is why the variable range in potency varies from product to product. And I'm also going to demonstrate that. The THC concentrates are known as shatter, dabs, butter, wax, and even butane honey oil. Not just the component, not just the smoked form marijuana joint. Now, these extracted and isolated form of THC is very potent. And the levels of THC in these products, such as shatter and dabs, can be as high as 99%. So we're talking about a very potent, concentrated form of the drug. Now, in comparison to Massachusetts law currently, THC falls into a Class C substance category. That includes drugs such as Vicodin, Xanax, Adderall, and even hallucinogens such as mushrooms. So in other words, today's marijuana and trends in THC edibles and concentrates provides a much more potent substance than it did years ago. So my primary goal is to inform citizens about what we're facing here in Massachusetts and what we should be concentrating on. My concern is primarily with our youth, and our youth having increased access and availability of these drugs in the future. And so with no further ado, I would like to start to demonstrate some of the items that I have here before you today. So the first thing I would like to demonstrate is this is a wrapped form of marijuana plant material. So this is 10 ounces of marijuana. And in Massachusetts, we would be allowing up to 10 ounces of marijuana in a private residence. On the street, if that were to be converted out onto the street market, we would be talking about $2,500 to $4,000 street price that people would be allowed to cultivate marijuana in their home. Now, the problem with that is that we do not have really the enforcement mechanism to take care of that on the enforcement side of things, because with the case law, the current case law facing marijuana, it would be very difficult for law enforcement to establish enough probable cause to get into a residence if there was illicit operations going on there, and make it very difficult for us. I'd also like to refer back to the marijuana joint that I spoke of earlier. This marijuana joint has a THC level of about 21.9%. Now, in comparison to 20 or 30 years ago, the marijuana that was found in our area had anywhere from 2 to 4% THC. So because of plant selection and cultivation techniques and different strains that are out there, this has now become a much more potent drug than it was years ago. So, some of the other things I'm going to take, these are the beverages. Now this is just, this is called Bubba Kush root beer. This is basically just a beverage of root beer which also contains THC. Now each of these bottles that you see on this table have anywhere from 10 to 12 to some have as high as 18 servings in them. So when you think about the level of THC as far as milligrams, so each serving usually comes in a 10 milligram serving. This is anywhere from 10 to 18 servings. So you would be taking that drug 10 to 18 times. And why that's a problem is because typically somebody would want to finish this whole drink, but yet that would provide for a very potent consumption of that drug. So, okay. Some of the other things that we have here, these are caramels. Cookies and cream and brownies. So these types of, these are just some of the baked goods that Massachusetts could be looking at. And these are basically just your typical brownie or your typical cookie, or we also have granola bars here on display. They're your typical food product that are now infused and have the THC extracted into the food component. And these can also be consumed. Now these also come in 10 milligram servings, but many of these different containers have 8, for instance, this is 8 servings, so there's 8 brownies in here. And these also have 8 as far as cookies and cream in the other one. So where you'd think that these are very small portion sizes, the THC in them can range again from, as I mentioned in the opening, anywhere from 18 to 30% THC level. So there's a wide varying range of potency, but also remember the fact that they come in 10 milligram sizes, and for example, this brownie case here has 8 servings inside. So that's that one. So just on I'm going to bring up some of our edible products as far as candies. And I'll try and tip these over a little bit so that our viewing audience can see. But this container contains different types of typical candies that you may see. Gummy bears, Swedish fish, juji fruits. There's even saltwater taffy, the starburst. Those are candies that we typically see consumed by children, not usually by adults. And these are the same types of candies here that are infused with THC. So again, THC levels vary with these products, maybe 18 again to 30% THC levels. But if you notice, these candies that are in here can really not be differentiated between the actual Swedish fish that we would buy in a candy store, or juji fruits, or starburst, or Sour Patch Kids, or whatever those things. Now, when we think about the commercialization of marijuana, of recreational marijuana coming to Massachusetts, you really have to ask yourself, what is this targeting? What is this industry looking at when we infuse products like Swedish fish and gummy bears and starburst with THC? And the answer to that is our children, it's our youth. Because it's similar to what we did with tobacco products years ago, is we're starting an industry that has to be focused on our early users that will lead up into their business profits later on in the future. So that's what we feel that this would be targeting as far as our youth. Now, here are some other, these are just some other examples of edibles. Now in Colorado, they've actually now kind of changed their law. They've modified it so that they could identify the difference between some of these candies. And as you can see, what they did is their regulations have come out with different forms and different shapes. So that it could be a star or a cluster or whatever else, but they can come up with these different shapes and forms that are now designed to differentiate. The problem with that is, if this were to come to Massachusetts, we still would allow home cultivation and processing and manufacturing of these products. So while the retail side of it would be regulated and fall under what's called the Cannabis Control Commission, which would be fed by a cannabis advisory board, they would come up with all of the regulations on how we would do this. And I'm sure they would have some regulation as to what the ways these candies could look and perhaps serving size and amount of THC level in them. However, that does not regulate the home cultivation side. And that's really where there's a major concern, is that where we're allowing processing and manufacturing of this drug in a home, people are going to take these other, your typical candies, your Starburst and your Sour Patch Kids and your gummy bears, Swedish Fish, and they're going to infuse those products with THC that is going to be diverted out into the streets and diverted to our youth. And obviously we have major public safety worries with that being concerned. Now this spray bottle here contains THC that was extracted from the marijuana plant and basically just put into a sprayer. Now I could take this spray and I could take your typical Starburst candies and I could lay them out on some wax paper and I could spray this THC onto the candy. And essentially I am thereby creating a THC candy using the actual candy that you would buy over the counter in a candy store. So while the regulated side is, there's regulations on that, we still are opening the floodgates on the other side as far as home cultivation and processing. So these are, again, just to show these quickly demonstrate, we have lip balm and different types of toffee, hard candy, which all are infused with THC products. This here, I'm going to bring this one up. Now these products here are basically, they may look familiar to some as being vaporizers or e-cigarettes, some people call them, or also known as vapes. Now these are a very common item today, and you see people moving away from the more smoked forms, the crude forms of tobacco products, and using the vaporizers as a health issue. Now these products here, the ones that we have here today, are vaporizers that have THC oils in them. So these individuals could basically take the extracted oils from the marijuana plant, put it inside of the vaporizer, and smoke that THC, pure THC, through the vaporizer. This is very difficult for people to observe as far as detection, because if it was say it was a child, or say it was somebody that was driving and they were smoking out of a vaporizer, it would be very difficult to detect that this was actually being smoked as THC, because the smell would be different, and the officer or a parent may not hear or smell that pungent odor of what typically comes from the marijuana plant. So it's very difficult to detect unless you get inside of the heating element that's inside of the vape, and you would typically might smell some marijuana inside of that. But that's another trend that we're looking at. They take these oils and put them inside of the vaporizers, and inhale that THC, that pure THC, and through that type of a device. Now some of the other things we have here, that was more on the edible side of things. This is more on some of the concentrates. So this is just basically this is hash, which is just put into a press and compressed out, put into more of a solid form that people could take and smoke that in a variety of different ways. We have what's called wax, or in this case here, this is called shatter. These substances are the extracted components of the THC plant. They're extracted out of the plant, they're isolated, and they're put in different consistencies, and then they're smoked in a variety of ways. It could be either reduced back down to an oil and smoked in a pipe or in a bong or anything like that, or as I mentioned, in the vape pens. Now, the difference between the marijuana joint that I showed earlier, this marijuana joint, as I mentioned, has about 21% THC in it. And when I talked about the THC of years ago, marijuana joint had 2 to 4%. This has about 21%. When you're talking about shatter and wax and that type of thing, the extracted components of the marijuana plant, now we're talking about anywhere as high as 99% purity, 99% THC. Now that's a very potent drug, and as I mentioned, that's a Class C substance in Massachusetts. And again, this is the trend that would be coming towards Massachusetts should we legalize recreational marijuana. So just quickly, like how does this happen? And I have some of the other trends that we see recently in Massachusetts. Is first of all, we have an issue, a public safety issue, where people have home cultivation, and when we have home cultivation, there's bootleg wiring, and there's not good ventilation, and there's high electricity output that's going into a residence or an apartment. And then there's gases such as butane gas or propane that are used to extract the oils from the marijuana plant. And we've seen explosions. We've seen several explosions in Massachusetts because of home cultivation grows. If anyone saw the news this past week, last Tuesday in New York City, there was a battalion chief firefighter from the New York Fire Department that was killed after responding to a marijuana grow cultivation site that exploded. That also hurt several other police officers and firefighters that were on scene. So this is a new trend. And the problem with this is we won't know where that is. We won't know where somebody is cultivating marijuana, processing it, using different bootleg wiring or different types of fertilizers, and not having good ventilation and using these gases to extract these oils. It's a serious public safety issue that we wouldn't know where these things are taking place. So this here is a hair straightener, and one of the other trends that we've seen around Massachusetts is people taking a hair straightener, taking marijuana plant, putting it inside of parchment paper, and basically heating the oils out of the marijuana plant and smoking that. And you know, to think that we could open the floodgates to allow this type of thing to happen on a regular basis is kind of frightening. What I don't have up here today is how an individual user may extract these oils using butane gas. And what we've seen happen is somebody will take the marijuana plant material, put it into a tube, and they will run the butane gas through the tube, and on the other end it will extract the oils that are coming out of the marijuana plant, and they can thereby produce drugs such as shatter that I showed before here. And you could essentially make and produce this drug by using that type of a technique. So the last thing, one of the other things I just want to talk about is, in Massachusetts, we're talking about regulation. And we're talking about regulating marijuana. And really, if you think about it, the difference between marijuana and recreational marijuana is, and through regulation, and we have these stickers, is really just a sticker. It's the same thing. And where we would have this Cannabis Control Commission that would oversee this recreational marijuana program, and there would be a marijuana advisory board that would provide information to this commission. That advisory board would be made up primarily of people from the marijuana industry. So, in fact, it would be 9 members that would be on that advisory commission that would provide the suggestions for regulations. So we have people from the industry actually making some of the regulations and the decisions that would be faced with. In closing, my purpose today was basically to just help my fellow citizens see what we're actually talking about when it comes to legalizing recreational marijuana. Again, my primary concern, as not just as a police chief, but as a neighbor, as a citizen, as a coach, all of the things that I am other than when I wear this uniform, is that I worry about our youth having increased access and availability to this very potent drug that I don't think is going to be a good thing for Massachusetts if it were to come. And I think that at the end of the day, what we have to ask ourselves is, well, first of all, what we have to tell ourselves is we decriminalized marijuana in 2008. We allowed medical marijuana in 2012. So people that, that compassionate care issue, people that have these ailments do have access to marijuana if they need it. But now we're talking about a whole different industry. We're talking about commercialization of a very powerful industry moving into Massachusetts and changing the landscape of Massachusetts as we know it. We're a very traditional state. We're a very, a lot of history. And this would come in and really change the backdrop of Massachusetts. But again, the primary concern is our youth and increasing access and availability to our youth of a very potent drug right during a time when we are in the middle of an epidemic of addiction. And to think that marijuana doesn't play any role in that addiction problem, it would be a bad decision because it does play a role to a certain degree. And so with that, we I hope that I helped educate a little bit on what Massachusetts is looking at, and I appreciate it. Thank you.